Herbert Norman Schwarzkopf Jr. was born on August 22, 1934, in Trenton, New Jersey. He was one of 3 children to Ruth Alice Bowman and his father, who he shared his name. At 18, he dropped the junior and his first name but kept the initial. His father, New Jersey's first state police superintendent, investigated the 1932 Lindbergh kidnapping. He was also a West Point graduate, fought in World Wars I and II, became a major general, and trained Iran's national police in the 1940s. During his youth, General Schwarzkopf attended Bordentown Military Institute near Trenton. However, between 1946 and 1950, he resided in various countries such as Iran, Switzerland, Germany, and Italy with his father. By the age of 17, he was proficient in French and German, and later attended Valley Forge Military Academy in Wayne, Pennsylvania, where he excelled in football and debate, even earning a championship title. While at West Point, he continued to showcase his athletic prowess as a member of the football and wrestling teams, and also participated in the choir. His passion for history fueled his desire to lead men in combat, which he compared to Alexander the Great. One of his former roommates, General Leroy Sudduth, recalled that no one laughed at his aspirations. Schwarzkopf graduated from West Point in 1956, placing 43rd in a class of 480, which isn't surprising when you realize he had an IQ of 168. Following his infantry and airborne training at Fort Benning, Georgia, he spent 2 years serving with airborne units in both America and Europe. He then undertook a 2-year assignment in Berlin, followed by a career officer course at Fort Benning. In 1964, he went on to earn a master's degree in guided missile engineering from the University of Southern California. In 1965, Captain Schwarzkopf was deployed to Vietnam, where he served as an advisor to a South Vietnamese airborne division. He demonstrated his resilience during a 10-day enemy siege. He returned to the United States as a major in 1966 and taught at West Point for 2 years. He then attended the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas as a lieutenant colonel. During his second tour in Vietnam, Colonel Schwarzkopf served as a battalion commander and earned the nickname Stormin Norman in 1969 to 1970. He demonstrated tremendous bravery, being wounded twice and receiving 3 Silver Stars. However, the loss of men under his command during 2 actions in 1970 deeply affected him. On February 18, 1970, an artillery shell intended for the enemy hit a treetop and killed Sergeant Michael E. Mullen, who was in one of the colonel's companies. Form letters sent to the sergeant's parents appeared to implicate the colonel, and they held him partially responsible as they campaigned against military insensitivity. This case became a controversial anti-war issue and damaged the colonel's reputation, which may have been undeserved. A 1976 book titled Friendly Fire by C.D.B. Bryan asserted the death was accidental, while a 1995 memoir by the sergeant's mother, Unfriendly Fire, blamed the military. On May 28, 1970, the colonel ordered his helicopter to land to rescue troops who had wandered into a minefield. Some were evacuated by air, but the colonel stayed behind with his men. When a soldier triggered a mine, shattering his leg and wounding the colonel, he crawled on top of the victim to prevent him from triggering more mines. 3 other soldiers lost their lives due to an exploding mine, but the colonel led the survivors to safety. This event cemented his reputation as a commander willing to put his own life at risk for his men. He returned from Vietnam disheartened by the Army's leadership and believed that the peace movement and news media were prolonging the war. His sister, Miss Barenbaum, was a peace activist, and they did not speak for years. He later realized that politicians had failed the war effort, resulting in the loss of 58,000 American lives, leaving him devastated, and at one point he considered resigning his commission. He decided to remain in the military during a challenging period for America. As historians have observed, the Army was in decline during and after Vietnam, with a draft force riddled with racial tensions, drug abuse, and disciplinary issues. Soldiers were disillusioned, and the uniform seemed tainted in a nation that had lost interest. Once proud traditions had been replaced by infamous body counts. However, reforms in recruitment, living conditions, planning, training, and leadership in the late 1970s and 1980s restored much of what had been lost. self-respect and professionalism in an all-volunteer service. Norman Schwarzkopf became a colonel in 1975, a brigadier general in 1978, a major general in 1982, and a lieutenant general in 1986. He moved from personnel and planning to brigade posts in Alaska and Washington State, from the Pacific Command in Hawaii to a division in Europe and back to Washington in charge of personnel. In 1983, while assigned to an elite tank division at Fort Stewart, Georgia, he was tapped to coordinate the task force that invaded Grenada. Revolutionaries had staged a coup, killed the prime minister, and with Cuban aid, were building an airfield, purportedly to supply Latin American insurgents. It was also feared that American medical students on the island might become hostages. Operation Urgent Fury suppressed the rebels, restored order, and brought the students home safely. In 1988, General Schwarzkopf was given his 4th star and named commander of the United States Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, supervising military activities in 19 countries in the Middle East, the Horn of Africa, and the Persian Gulf. He developed contingency plans for war in Iraq, and 2 years later they were needed. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi troops seized Kuwait, prompting General Schwarzkopf to relocate his headquarters to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. There, he oversaw the buildup of a massive Allied force of 765,000 troops, including 540,000 Americans, as well as a large Arab contingent led by Prince Khalid bin Sultan of Saudi Arabia. Despite trade embargoes and warnings, Iraq refused to withdraw from Kuwait. When a deadline passed on January 15, 1991, the world's first heavily televised war began. Audiences watched live missiles hitting targets and fighter jets taking off from aircraft carriers. Cable news stations provided round-the-clock updates, and major networks anchored their newscasts from Baghdad. From Riyadh, General Schwarzkopf led the briefings, controlling the release of information. Some reporters were granted access to the field, but under military supervision and censorship. The result was a highly visible commander in fatigues and a dramatic war. Thanks to his left hook strategy, which involved placing troops behind enemy lines for a swift and decisive strike, the ground war was over in just a few days. While old official photographs from that time depict him as a decorated military figure, standing at 6'3" and weighing 240 pounds, with a stern and determined gaze, they fail to capture his softer side. He was known for his love of music, which ranged from Pavarotti to Willie Nelson and Bob Dylan. He also enjoyed outdoor activities such as hunting, fishing, and ballet. Like any soldier, he made it a point to call home twice a week from the war zone. He wore 2 watches, one on each wrist with 2 different time zones. On one wrist he wore a Seiko, and on the other a Rolex, which was rumored to have been a gift from the President of the United States. Just 3 months after the war, in 1992, General Schwarzkopf signed a $5 million contract with Bantam Books for the worldwide rights to his memoirs titled It Doesn't Take a Hero, which he co-wrote with Peter Petra. 3 months after the war ended, the book was published. In 1993, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, but he was successfully treated for it. While he supported Mr. Bush's presidential campaigns in 2000 and 2004, and Senator John McCain's 2008 race against Senator Barack Obama, he never ran for political office himself. Sadly, General Norman Schwarzkopf, who is considered the most celebrated military hero since the mid-20th century, passed away at the age of 78 in Tampa, Florida, on the 27th of December 2012, due to complications arising from a recent bout of pneumonia. His funeral took place in West Point Cemetery, and he was buried near his father.